So what's the forecast? What's my aspect? What direction is it facing? What's my elevation? And what are the conditions? You just have to hit the right thin spot that triggers the entire slope and creates that domino effect of an avalanche. So keep the principles that I'm about to tell you. And then human factors, probably the most important part of traveling in avalanche terrain. Take that back. It is the most important. Let's start with the equipment. A little bit about myself. Name's Erik Fullmer. I grew up mostly in the US, but I also grew up in Germany. I also lived there as an adult, so understand the European weekend getaway ski experience. I used to belong to a ski club in Frankfurt, and for skiing, I started when I was 7 in Vermont, for those that are familiar, at Bolton Valley in the local public school program. That was 33 years ago, and I began backcountry skiing about 16 or 17 years ago. I am a co-owner and operator of Wasatch Mountain Guides. We're based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. I live in Provo myself, but we also guide other places besides Utah. But yeah, we love guiding in Alaska and in South America and Svalbard and other places. And then the picture on the right is me in my happy place. That's why I'm making the weird face. That's in Alaska. So getting into what we'll cover today, we'll be covering what backcountry skiing is, moving from a resort to the backcountry, the basics of equipment, clothing, travel on avalanche terrain, the human factor, group dynamics, which are very key and crucial in backcountry travel. And then we'll be covering the why of what we do. So just getting through some definitions to make sure we're all on the same page, understanding what we're talking about today. On-piste skiing is skiing essentially within marked trails and boundaries at a ski resort. That differs between Europe and the United States. In the US, we have a lot of marked areas and controlled terrain, and Europe is far more flexible. So there are some cultural and logistical differences between what on-piste is between the two continents, but in general, these definitions are going to be fairly the same. Slack country, which includes off-piste skiing. So off-piste skiing is outside of those marked trails and natural terrain. Slack country is things that you can usually access from a lift, and then you get out of controlled terrain, but you also ski back to a lift or something like that. Sometimes confused with side country, but the main point is that there's not patrollers, there's not avalanche control work, so technically you're on your own. So you might get lured into going to an area where the terrain's not maintained, but you need to be careful and consider that there's no patrollers for you. Side countries, when we typically use lifts or a gondola or some sort of mechanized transportation to access backcountry terrain or side country terrain. And from those areas, you can ski and travel uphill with skins. And by touring, once again, there's no patrollers and no avalanche work. Just because you access it from the resort doesn't mean the resort has any responsibility for your safety once you leave their maintained areas. And then finally, backcountry. That's what we're working up to. Skiing in remote terrain, unpatrolled areas, obviously. I mean, all the decisions are yours. The equipment, rescue equipment, safety equipment, everything is yours. You need to rely on you and your group for self-rescue. There's not always public rescue available. So that's what we want to all work up to, because we want goals like what you see right here. This is called the Cherry Couloir in Alaska. Really classic line we did this April. And then just showing you why we do it. Just a clip of me skiing from Alaska this year. And this is a couloir in Alaska. And, being able to get to this zone and hike up this couloir and get the first line down in Alaska Powder is, a real treat, and takes some years of education and things like that. But, eventually you can work up and go to zones like this where you have just endless couloirs. That's called Iguana Back East, I believe, in Alaska near Valdez. And these are just some photos of the why. Again, what we're going for, what we want to get out and do that's far outside of resort boundaries. So you have Chilean volcanoes in Patagonia, which are a super fun trip. You get to ski on these volcanoes that have this great corn snow, and 5,000 vertical feet below you is a green valley in the springtime. So a lot of really cool contrast. Svalbard, a very unique zone as well in the Arctic. I believe this is at 78 degrees north, just below 79 degrees north. Svalbard again. Just tons of glaciers there. Most glaciers I've ever seen in one area. Created a lot of really cool microenvironments. But we have volcanoes here in the Pacific Northwest. For those that know, Mount Baker, the volcano is right behind Willie. A very experienced guide and co-owner of Wasatch Mountain Guides, Willie Venegas. Some of you might know his name. We'll go over a little about him later. This is skiing from close to the summit of Mount Baker. After we summited, Ecuador also has volcanoes in corn snow. Seems to be a trend. And then up Valdez, Alaska. That's Todd Passy, our other co-owner. Also a very experienced AMGA guide. Skiing powder in a couloir before the helicopter skiers get there. It's a great feeling. And then this is Denali National Park in Alaska. Also tons of terrain. And then my home, the Wasatch. For those that know Chad's Gap, a very famous ski gap in movies where Tanner Hall broke his ankles and in other ski movies, that's this right here. That's a famous jump. And then this is Mount Superior, a classic 50 ski descent here in Utah. Really a classic line, super fun to ski, great powder day. And then this is the Southern Wasatch. And just as a disclaimer, we're not doing a Navi course today, not an Avalanche course. It's an introduction to backcountry skiing. We'll go over the basics of avalanches and traveling in avalanche terrain, but it's not a substitute for an education with a professional in a field setting where you're out there with the professional learning. Okay, let's start with the equipment. So backcountry equipment is in a lot of ways very different from resort equipment, but in some ways also the same. With backcountry skiing, the same as resort skiing, touring, there are a huge amount of touring skis that you can choose from in order to get started. So in the past, it wasn't like that, but in the past while, like there's been a lot of manufacturing of touring skis, but even some skis that you use in resort can be used touring, like these Backlands. Some of you might ski those in resorts. I love touring on these things. They're just light enough to tour on. But to get into some recommendations on what would be the best touring ski for someone, we'll focus on some definitions here. We have alpine touring skis, skis that find a balance between the uphill and the downhill, right? You don't want to go too light where it's easy on the uphill, but on the downhill, you're getting bounced around a lot because the ski is just, it has no power to it. So you want to find something light, but something also that is fun enough on the downhill. So typically the underneath foot waist width of those skis are going to be 85 to 105 millimeters. Then there's ski mountaineering skis, fast and lightweight. So for long distances and technical sense, it's good to have really light skis. A lot of the times the skis are on your back when you get into climbing terrain. So they'll be a bit more narrow and ultra light, but the downside is on the ski descent, it's nothing like skiing a resort ski. You feel every turn and you feel every bump. So you got to be a pretty good skier to be able to ski those in that type of terrain. Then we have freeride. These two are examples of freeride touring skis. They're 107 and 105 underfoot respectively. Really fun, playful skis. Cardiff is a local Utah brand. Those are for those that love resort skiing, for example, and love the freeride aspect of everything, and they want to find a ski that just gets them up the hill in the backcountry, but is super fun on the downhill. And then we have wide powder touring skis, like these right here. These are 117 underfoot, and these are what I use in places like Alaska or Utah powder day. The thing is, there's a lot of tools to choose from, and with that, it takes some research on the internet to read reviews and read what's going to work best for you. Your size is a factor, your experience is a factor, and your objectives are a factor. So weigh all those variables and decide what's going to be a great touring ski for you to start on. Oftentimes, with how much everything costs, you can start on just one pair, and it takes some time to build a quiver. Like this. This is my old pair that I had, for example. It has an old frame binding on it. We'll get to that in a second. That allowed me to ski this in a resort, but also tour on them. So I had to have a hybrid. And hybrids are just fine, especially for those that are in Europe where backcountry and side country terrain is very accessible. And so let's talk about the bindings and what role those play. Tech bindings are, I know this is on a split board, but it's the same type of binding that you would see on the skis right here. These are also tech bindings. They have a special toe on them and heel on them that is extremely lightweight and good for mobility. So a tech binding is going to be a binding that has special type of boots, but they are best for range of motion and for climbing and for how light they are. Then there's frame bindings. I showed that too on my old pair of skis. Those are kind of going by the wayside, but they still exist. But there's some really cool hybrid options nowadays that are making frame bindings a bit more obsolete. And frame bindings were great, but they're also very heavy and your mobility is not so great in them. So hybrids are like the Frischke bindings. They used to be frame bindings, but not anymore. They have this specific toe piece, but the heel binding is more like a resort heel binding. You also have AT bindings with adjustable toe and heel. The Solomon shifts or atomic shifts, same thing, are also more so like an AT binding, but you have these bindings that are great for skiing in resorts and great for the downhill, and they do all right on the uphill. And then you have the old school, how it all started, telemark bindings. That's how everyone started touring. And then on the split board side of things, you have your normal bindings that you can attach right here and tour in. Those are great for those snowboarders that love their soft boots, but not so great when you get more into ski mountain touring terrain. And for those, you would want to use tech bindings like this. The only downside is with tech bindings on a split board is that you have to have a hard boot, and that hard boot it's a ski boot. Right. One of the major advantages to snowboarding is a soft boot. So you are in a hard boot. It has a special toe piece and heel piece on it, so you can tour in it. But it's great for climbing and moving quickly in the backcountry. And then boots. Ski touring boots have these special lugs on the front and back that help us attach to the bindings. So you can't just use any alpine ski resort boot for ski touring with most of the bindings. You have to get something specific to ski touring. We have these little divots here that go into the toe piece there, and I have a little demo there. But, speaking of boots, boots are where you want to spend your most money, and that counts in the resort and outside of the resort. Like your feet are in them all day, and they tend to be the most problematic thing if something goes wrong in them. So it's worth going to a professional boot fitter, trying on the size, and buying a boot with a liner that's customizable, that's heat moldable, or a boot that you can what's called punch out or shave out, that forms to your feet. More so than a resort boot, you want a touring boot to fit right because you have a lot of different type of movement in that boot. So one bad boot can ruin a day in the backcountry very easily. I've seen it happen many times before. So once again, go to a shop for boots. I only buy a boot online if I purchased it before and I know that it fits my foot. And as you can see here, the toe piece right there, that's where it inserts in the front of the binding, and in the back of the binding, this is called a heel lifter, and that helps with steeper ascents. I have a little demo, and that's the range of motion when you're walking. It drags forward like that, and then say I get into steep terrain, then I will put down that heel lifter, and that'll help with leveraging my weight underneath me while I'm hiking in steeper ascents, and it helps me have to not step as far down. It just essentially it conserves a lot of energy. And then when I'm ready to ski, it's hard without gloves. Flip it around, put the boot into ski mode, which I'll do right here. And then I'm in the binding and I'm in ski mode. And then I put that front piece down because when you ski with pin bindings like that, so these AT bindings, you have to put it down to ski mode so it releases in case of an accident. That's the range of motion with a ski touring boot. You can see it's very different from a resort boot. And then that's when I put in ski mode, it has that normal resort flex. So that's basically the basics of alpine touring boot. Touring skins. This side's the grip side. This side's the glue side. This grip is, imagine horsehair. When you run your hand down horse or an animal like a horse, you go with the grain of the hair and it is smooth, and the moment you go back the other direction, it catches and there's a bunch of friction. It's the same concept, that they developed originally skins from animal furs like that. So that's where we get the concept. Now they're mostly synthetic. I got a couple recommendations for those getting into the sport. Nylon skins, the downside is they're heavier, but the durability and the grippiness is worth it. So the grip is on the ascent, so when you're climbing. And then you have mohair skins, which are lightweight and they glide really well, more close to the original version of skins with animal fur. And then there's a blend between the two, nylon mohair blend skins. It's a balance of grip and glide. Also a recommendation for those just getting into the sport. As you can see here, you cut the skins when you get them. Sometimes you can buy skins that are pre-cut to the specific ski that you'll be on. That's great. It's done with the machine. It's very exact. Or you get the skins and they're not pre-cut, which happens more frequently than not. And you can either cut them with the tools they send you. It's not too hard. Or you can take it to professional. But if you cut them yourselves, there's always great instructions. The key is that you want the edge fully exposed, but not really any of the base. You need the edge as part of your grip, especially in harder conditions, icier conditions. But if you expose too much base, it can create issues with slipping. And then this is just to show the attachment on the nose of the ski. And then skincare, really important because they're expensive and you can make them last a long time. And if you take care of them right, you can rejuvenate the glue and the grip. But one thing to keep in mind is there's a mortal enemy of my skins is my husky. These skins are hardly ever in the same room as Bottles, my dog here, because it just turns into a problem. So I was just doing this for illustration here, but he's in the same room as my skins for a few minutes and you can already see I have his hair right here. The point is, store your skins somewhere where they stay clean and a cool, dry place. If you have a basement in the summer, that's a great place for it. In the winter, I put them in the garage so they're accessible but cool and dry. And then take care of your skin glue after every tour. Go home or at the trailhead, look at your skin glue, and if there's needles in there or little rocks or dirt, take a little knife and get that out, because the longer it sits, the more it's going to adhere to the glue and just be a permanent part of your skins. And the more matter particles that you have in the skin glue, the less grip that glue and less adhesion it's going to have to your ski. So a lot of dirt and pine needles and one tour can ruin a pair of skins. So clean them every time that you have them. And when you're not using them on the regular, it's okay to put glue on glue to put them together. But say you're not using them on the regular, use that plastic liner that the skins come with to hold the skins. And the longer that the glue is on the glue, the more it's going to adhere to itself. So it'll bond more and more the longer it's together, and it'll be difficult to pull apart. Take care of your skins. There's plenty of resources online on how to take care of your skins, but it's a tool that you can make last a really long time. I have my first pair of skins still. Don't really use them too much, but they're still in pretty good shape. And that was in 2008, I believe. Touring poles. The reality is you can tour with any poles. You know, there's a market and they want to sell them, and there are pros and cons to certain types of backcountry specific touring poles, but it's not the first buy that you need to make. I would recommend it as your last buy. You know, I've had people and myself, we've gone out with resort poles. But once you make the investment into touring poles, the important part is to consider the grip when you're on steep ascents. Having a grip that's lower down is great for choking up on the pole rather than going all the way to the handle and having your hand too high. A good grip is nice, and adjustable poles are nice too. Some like it a certain length while hiking, certain length while skiing. I myself just keep it at the same length and use these grips for adjusting the length of the pole by changing my grip. And then there are specific backpacks for backcountry touring. You know, they're expensive, and I get wanting to save the money and use a backpack you might use any other time of year. But the reality is you eventually, and as soon as possible, should get one because they have specific Avalanche rescue pockets in them. In this pocket, I don't put anything else, the exception maybe being an emergency communication device at the very base of the pocket. But on top of all this stuff goes nothing. You don't want anything blocking your deployment of your rescue tools in the event of an emergency. 1, it wastes time. 2, it can fluster you. 3, it's more things that get tangled up as you're trying to deploy your probe or your shovel. So buy a backpack with a specific pocket. Speaking of backpack, what's inside my bag? I have it all pictured here. This is a repair kit. This is electrolytes with anti-inflammatories. We have skin and ski wax, a scraper to de-ice my skis and my skins or get snow off the glue so it can stick to the ski. There's so many reasons. You don't have to have a full-size ski scraper. I just cut this with a little saw and just made it smaller. Sun protection, utility knife, wag bag, female urination device are extremely useful with all the clothes that you have to wear for females. And then first aid kit, a bivvy for sleeping and for shelter in the event of emergencies. They're light, they're small. There's no reason not to have one. Phones die. Phones get lost, so you always want to have a backup emergency communication device. Not all phones have service, even for 911, so always carry this. And then a headlamp for emergencies. You never know when you're going to be stuck in the backcountry overnight or coming out late because of an injury. I always keep all this stuff here in my bag. Not shown is my extra puppy I always have, extra gloves on wet and stormy days. Yeah, so my repair kit, if you take away anything from this picture for a repair kit, I would say baling wire, Gorilla tape, duct tape works awesome too, and these fasteners. All these are key tools to making all sorts of different repairs. I'd say the tool I use the most for repairs in the backcountry is my Gorilla tape. It's extremely strong tape, and you can even make splints for first aid from it. And speaking of first aid, I have my gloves for biohazard, stuff for blisters, bandages, triangle bandages for a number of different types of injuries, medicines, including Benadryl for allergic reactions. The same splint I recommend for those that have no experience with creating splints. It's great for that. If you have experience creating splints, then leave it at home, save the weight, because there's so many different things you can use from our touring equipment to create a splint. The one thing I would recommend, and this comes recommended by a really good friend of mine that's a trauma nurse, mainly in ERs, is a tourniquet, a cat tourniquet, a real tourniquet. Improvised tourniquets don't do a great job of actually stopping the bleed. They're cool videos to watch and cool to see. In the worst case, you can try to make it work by tying maybe 2 of them or something. The reality is you want to get a real tourniquet because time is of the essence if you have that type of bleed. So I highly recommend a cat tourniquet. They're light, unpackable, and relatively cheap. And then this is just to give you a view of a full snow study kit. You don't need it unless you're really getting into the snow science of things, but it's just cool to see. This is a crystal card. This is a loop, something that magnifies the snow crystal so I can see it. This is a thermometer to measure the temperature outside and the snow because that matters. But the main thing I would say is to bring a cordage like this that's at least 6 feet, a good arm's width, and that is used for cutting your extended comm tests if you get into testing the snowpack side of things. And then the essential stuff, avalanche rescue gear, beacon, shovel, probe, beacons, and then shovels and probes. Don't buy plastic shovels. They will not be helpful in an avalanche. Cutting through avalanche debris is extremely hard. So you want a good sturdy shovel. I have the opinion that some shovels are becoming too lightweight and are too fragile, even the aluminum or metal, like these light metal ones. I recommend some of the mid-size Ortovox shovels, I think, and this one will last a while, and you can sharpen the blade if you know how to do that, and they're extremely durable. Snow saw is more for testing the snowpack, but it's nice to have in some emergencies. This is a beacon demo right here. So I have one beacon on that I'm holding on the lower part of the screen. So now it's in search mode, looking for another beacon, and it just picked it up. You can see it showing the distance with the beeps. I'm moving away. Beeps are getting quieter. That's how you search. One thing is to always keep in mind is you want your batteries to be above 50%. You check that with your group at the beginning of the day. Below 50%, you want to change those batteries just to know that you have enough battery life for the day. Beacons last a long time, but always use alkaline batteries. Beacons have a difficult time reading the battery percentage of lithium batteries, so you'll go with lithium batteries from 90% to all of a sudden they're dead. So alkaline batteries and transceivers or beacons communicate really well, and you have a good understanding of how much battery life is left with those alkaline batteries. Now for the clothing, clothing is all about the layering. You don't want to buy a thick insulated jacket like you would in a resort where you're mainly on a lift and skiing downhill. There's a lot of fluctuations in temperature, both body and outside temperature. You're moving through sun, you're moving through shade, you have wind, you have sunshine. It's all about the layering in the backcountry. So one tool I always have is my puffy to start the day, when you get to start a ski run, when you're in the shade, when you're standing around having a break, and then the classics, soft shell or hard shell. And my answer is always both. They both work great. They just have their pros and cons. The main thing is hard shells are a little bit more waterproof and windproof. Soft shells are more breathable and flexible and I'd say more comfortable. But they both do well in the backcountry and have their purpose. Just to give you more of an idea of the pros and cons of hard shells, I put that down right here. It doesn't have to be necessarily a ski specific hard shell. A lot of those are quite heavy and bulky and meant for resort skiing. So I actually bought this that's meant for thru hikers is what it's technically meant for, but it's a really lightweight hard shell. It does a great job with being windproof and waterproof. And the other thing that I really like about it is the zippers go all the way down to my waist and then come all the way up to the middle of the arm. So I can really open up that hard shell and let my body breathe while still being protected from wind or snow. Soft shells, same thing, some pros and cons for you. The main thing is if it gets really wet or really windy, they might not protect you the same as a hard shell would, but they're comfortable, they're stretchy, and they breathe really nicely. You can have interplay between the two different types of layers. Same goes for pants. These are soft shell and these are hard shell. Key thing I'm going to tell you for a hard shell pant is it needs to have vents because they don't breathe like soft shells do, and good vents. Yeah, that's one of the things I inspect when I'm buying hard shell pants is the vents. I prefer them on the outside. The ones on the inside work well too, but I tend to like them better on the outside, but it's preference. And then a vest is great because it keeps your core warm, but it lets you let off a bunch of steam, essentially, lets your body breathe really well. And they also come with good hoodies that protect you from the sun. And speaking of sun and hoodie, I never really tour without a sun hoodie. They're thin, and the main purpose is that they protect you from the sun, and you keep that hood up, and it shades a lot of your face, and they're a great tool to have. Base layer can be synthetic, or it can be 100% merino wool, or it could be a mix of the two, kind of like hard shell and soft shell. there's pros and cons. Synthetic wools, they are a little bit warmer. I think they breathe just fine. They do get far less stinky than a synthetic base layer, but a synthetic base layer is really excellent at moisture wicking and quick drying. So sometimes I have synthetic base layer on my lower body, but my upper body usually has a merino wool or a synthetic wool blend. And then gloves, I highly recommend leather in the backcountry. You're digging around in the snow a lot more. You're using your hands a lot more. So you need something really waterproof and something that lasts a while. Leather is great because you can recondition it and reimpregnate it with certain types of creams that help the gloves last a really long time. So I have a thin pair. When I'm using a lot of tools and stuff, I like to use these. These keep my hands warmer. Most of the time when I'm touring, you can see how worn out these liners are. I'm using liners because I want my hands to breathe. They get warm. So I have something thin that still keeps my hands warm, and protects me from the sun, but breathes a lot better. So there's a lot of interchanging between what you're wearing on your hands while in the backcountry, just like your top and bottom layers. And then most importantly, protect the head. You need a ski-rated helmet, just like in a resort, but they have some backcountry ones, Movement, like the brand here, Movement, that are really light, but rated for ski impacts. Goggles, I leave home unless it's stormy. That's a preference thing because I have these glasses that ski really well and keep the wind and snow out of my eyes if it's snowing a little bit. But if I tour with just the sunglasses, I have a pair of glasses that are interchangeable with different lenses. So I have a transparent or a low light lens in case clouds move in or a little storm moves in or something like that. And then the other stuff would be sun protection, mostly buffs, a nice thin buff. Don't get really insulated, thick fleece buff. And I like a thin one that I wear while touring. If you have a thicker buff, it's great, but you might want to maybe put that on right before you ski or something like that. I sweat a lot, so I wear a headband and I have a hat. You can see the testament to the sweat right there. And then synthetic or merino wool socks or something like that, but not socks that are too thick that obviously affect the boot. So moving on to traveling in avalanche terrain. This is Alaska again, by the way. We have a cool little video that does a really good job of illustrating some basics and familiarizes us with the North American danger scale, which is very similar to the danger scale that's used within Europe. So this translates.
Beautiful landscapes and the possibility for play and adventure lure an increasing number of people into the backcountry each winter. Although recreating in the winter environment is rewarding, it can also be dangerous. Snow avalanches kill around 45 people in North America each year. If you enter avalanche terrain, your safety depends on your ability to understand and assess conditions on the slopes you plan to climb or descend. Avalanche terrain can be defined as snow-covered slopes steeper than about 30 degrees and any terrain underneath these slopes. In a simple sense, avalanche danger is a function of the size of potential avalanches and the possibility of encountering one. Safe travel in avalanche terrain involves understanding consequence. Large avalanches are obviously dangerous. However, small avalanches are also dangerous in terrain where we can be pushed over cliffs, banged into trees, or buried in depressions. The North American Avalanche Danger Scale is a tool used by avalanche forecasters to communicate the potential for avalanches to cause harm or injury to backcountry travelers. The scale consists of 5 ascending danger levels that focus on travel advice and provide an actionable starting place for your daily planning. The assigned avalanche danger applies only to avalanche terrain. Danger ratings cover broad areas in general terms, and it is your job to make slope-specific assessments. In general, when conditions are more dangerous, the places you can safely go in the terrain become more limited. Low avalanche danger does not mean no danger, but under these conditions, you can travel safely if you understand that there may be unstable snow on isolated features and in extreme terrain. Moderate danger means you need to have heightened caution and carefully evaluate or avoid areas in the terrain that are identified in that day's avalanche advisory. Under considerable danger, avoid avalanche terrain if you don't have the skills and experience to move through terrain carefully. Human-triggered avalanches are likely, and careful evaluation, route finding, and decision-making are essential. It is prudent to avoid avalanche terrain on high and extreme days regardless of your experience. Your safe options in the terrain become limited to non-existent. Finally, remember that you control your own risk. For example, you can assume high levels of risk on a low danger day by choosing to enter consequential terrain. Conversely, you can minimize your risk on a high danger day by simply avoiding avalanche terrain altogether. The avalanche danger scale is a starting point in your daily planning process, but in the end, you are in charge and you make the choice.
Love the ending there. Responsibility for yourself and your party is yours and yours alone in the backcountry. Consider that before you leave every day, and also consider the avalanche danger. Mostly everywhere we tour backcountry, especially if we're just getting into it, it's going to have a regional avalanche forecast, no matter, the area that you're in, whether it's Europe or North America. European model, pretty much the same. They use numbers more so than the words, but everything aligns. So internationally, when you travel, the color is a great indication of what's happening. And then when you have a chance, you want to read through what the travel advice is, how it aligns with the forecast for the day. Forecast centers usually do a good job of communicating that in their post and the likelihood as well as the size and distribution. But, you want to always refer back to that. So you have that embedded in your memory and mind of what type of travel advice there is that aligns with the conditions. But regions are large. Regions have micro zones, features, environments, and a moderate avalanche danger day forecasted across the entire region might have some considerable zones in it as well that aren't considered in the forecast because the forecasters have to cover such large areas. So it's your responsibility to assess the slope, like it said. Traveling in avalanche terrain, know before you go, make a route for the day, review the avalanche forecast, get practice, know your team. You just have to be prepared. You just can't go out there. Travel with partners. And are your partners trained on companion rescue? Are you doing it early in the year? Are you doing it in the summer? Are you doing it midwinter? You don't need snow to practice companion rescue. You can just even do beacon practice where you hide a beacon in a park under some leaves or under some flower pot or something like that. You can get creative with it. Communication is a key before you go, while you're there, and after. Always be talking about what you're planning, what you're seeing, and how things went. And then travel in avalanche terrain, not everything goes right. Just a short little story to illustrate that sometimes things go sideways and you just have to make the best. When we were in Alaska on an AMGA exam that I had last April, we were helicopter bumped into a zone where we spent the night. And if those that are familiar with the Valdez area, you go in the mountains, and in some areas you can ski or snowboard all the way to the ocean, all the way to sea level. So we were at a certain elevation high in the mountains and we had to exit and go home. Things went wrong with the timing and the route that we chose and how long that route took. And then we get into this large canyon that's very narrow with avalanche paths on both sides, and you have to ski through that. And sure enough, two grizzly bears had woken up for the spring, and they were playing, and then luckily decided to exit the area. So we weren't trapped, but we had to wait for them to exit, obviously. And they had just woken up, so, they're hungry and angry. So we were avoiding them, but as we were waiting, a big avalanche came down in front of us. We had to cross that debris. And as we were making our way through that canyon as fast as we could, more avalanches were heard and coming down behind us and above us. So there was a heavy mental exercise in keeping eyes on each other, spacing out the right way, traveling safe zone to safe zone, or at least stopping in what we considered the safest zone, even though there was no safe zone. So the key thing that we all did was remain calm and kept working as a team. And we all kept to the plan that we made on the go to adjust to those avalanche conditions. So stuff happens, and keep calm, keep the principles that I'm about to tell you of traveling one at a time in avalanche prone zones. Stay out of the way of huge paths if you can. Sometimes you can't, but if you can, give a large avalanche path a wide berth. And then wise use of terrain, travel on gentle slopes, thick forests, alone on ridge lines, and etc. And avoid terrain traps. We'll come back to terrain traps. And then flexibility. Do we have a plan B, no plan C, and what's our escape plan? And that's not just for the overall route plan. Oftentimes when you start a ski run, you need to visualize your route. And if something were to go wrong, where are you going to ski to safety? If you don't assess that before you're skiing, things happen fast. And you're not going to have time to make a plan of where to ski. Maybe impulsively or reflexively, you ski to that safe zone, but it's always better to visualize and communicate to your party, I'm going to ski to that little sub-ridge right there if this avalanche is right now when I ski. Route planning, we won't spend too long on this, but I'll show you this resource right here. Mountain Mapping Education is now part of the Mountain Training Center by a local guide here in Utah. It has a really cool masterclass on learning digital mapping tools. I highly recommend that, or at least learning through YouTube and other methods on how to use digital maps. This is CalTopo. And so when I'm route planning, say for example, I'm actually going to ski right in here. I know I'll be in avalanche terrain. So I know that because we have shaded slope angle relief, which is all of this color. Anything yellow and above means it's above 30 degrees. So avalanche terrain. The darker it is, the steeper it is. So if I were to make a route right here, I'm like, I'm mostly out of avalanche paths, so it's safe to travel in this terrain. But then say I get up to here and I'm going to ski, I know I have to ski in avalanche terrain. So what's the forecast? What's my aspect? What direction is it facing? That's west. What's my elevation? And what are the conditions on that aspect and elevation? Is there a forecast for an avalanches in those zones, or have we seen recent avalanches there? So what's my route? And what's my plan B if that doesn't work out? Well, maybe I regress through here. So learning these mapping tools is critical for planning your backcountry touring, and also having out in the field with you to stop and assess where you are, to verify where you are, or verify that you're in an avalanche path, or see if you're lost, see if you're off route. So I recommend Caltopo. It's harder to learn, but it's a better overall tool. Onyx Backcountry is good. That map was great. Rest in peace. Google Earth and Gaia are great. And I let Strava off because they killed that map, and I'm mad. All right, so discuss the current Utah snowpack. The components of an avalanche are we need a bed surface, a weak layer, and a slab for an avalanche to happen. What I wanted to discuss about the Utah snowpack right now is we have a bed surface, which can be pretty much anything. It can be the snow, it can be rocks, like rock slab, it can be the ground. Some bed surfaces are more resistant or less resistant to avalanches than others. And right now we have that, but we also have weak layers forming. So we had some snow earlier in the year, but it's very shallow. And right now we have warm days and cold nights. And the ground always stays around freezing in the winter. And with that, you have a certain temperature here that emits from the ground through the snow. And then you have outside air temperature that's really cold that also emits. And that variability, that difference in the temperatures, creates a process in the snow called faceting. And that's where essentially the snow particles don't bond together and they turn into these sharp crystals that are essentially sometimes like almost like break like glass. If you imagine a weak layer collapsing or breaking, it spreads like it does right here, which we'll get to. But right now we don't have a slabbing tone. So we're not having avalanches, but we're setting up for future avalanches. So our next big storms that we get, once it's enough snow and enough slab on top, that's going to overpower this weak layer. It'll either naturally collapse or will be triggered artificially by another person or a falling rock or explosives at a resort, and we'll have avalanches. This right here was a natural avalanche, probably caused by loading of wind pushing snow over here and creating what we call a wind slab. My guess is that it broke right around here. Oftentimes a weak layer forms around rock bands and cliffs because again of that, the emission of higher temperatures below it and outside cold air temperatures. So you get a lot of faceting around rock bands and such. And then what happened was the slab was connected. So as soon as that weak layer collapsed right here, also you have what's called propagation in the slab, and that creates this avalanche, right? And then your run out zone and your debris zone, and this is the avalanche track. So it's the basic components of an avalanche. Best thing to do is avoid them. And then just to give you an idea, avalanches, they flow like water because they are water. They are very powerful, and if you're familiar with rivers and powerful movement of water, is nothing you can do if you're caught in it. This skier is extremely lucky. It looks like they were intentionally checking the slope and cutting it. And luckily they were, and they didn't ski straight into this line because that would have been lights out, as this is a very powerful avalanche, so powerful that it stepped quite far back from where he was. So luckily he was traversing and got away from that. Yeah, water is very powerful, and this is massive. It's hard to see the perspective of how deep it is and for me to give you a guess, but I'm maybe 10 feet, 3 meters, something like that or more. And then it happens fast. Like I said, if you don't plan your escape zone beforehand, like boom, should have gone left, hard left. But oftentimes you have no power to do that when the avalanche happens. Within seconds, he's in the avalanche and really has no control of what's happening other than some basic self-preservation techniques that you would learn in an avalanche course that we're not going to discuss right now. But second wave of the avalanche comes and he's fully buried. totally fine. Rescued by his partners. They had all the gear. Point is, they had their airbags, they had their beacon shovel probe, and everything turned out all right. If he wouldn't have, it wouldn't have turned out all right. Time is of the essence with avalanche rescues. Let's just say you have a benchmark of 10 to 15 minutes to get to the victim before the chance of surviving plummets. You can see in the graph here, here's the 15-minute mark, dips below 50%. But I know a guide that was buried in a terrain trap, 6 feet deep, about 2 meters, a little more, for 22 minutes and survived. So you know what happens? The best thing he said he did was he calmed down and just trusted his partners, and then he passed out and woke up when they rescued him. So did really well. But the reality is asphyxiation that gets avalanche victims. It's also trauma. So the best thing is to just avoid. It used to be the metric was 25% of avalanche victims died of trauma. Now they have a recent study saying 50%. Reality is more people die skiing by trauma in ski resorts than in avalanches through trauma. So keep that in mind. Yeah, we don't want to be buried in an avalanche, but we also don't want to hit a tree or get thrown over rocks and stuff like that. That's something also very important to consider. ALPTRUTH is a great acronym developed by Ian McCammon, a behavioral scientist that studied a bunch of avalanche incidents, and he found that in over 90% of every avalanche accident, 3 or more of these factors was present. We're going to just breeze through this: avalanche activity, new snow, being an avalanche path, being a terrain trap, the rating of considerable or higher, unstable snow signs like collapses, cracking in the snow, all these things, warming temperatures, rapidly warming temperatures for extended period of time, like 2 to 3 days. Things like that are these red flags that should be telling us that we're setting ourselves up to be in an avalanche accident. So come back and revisit the term ALPTRUTH. If you take a level 1 avalanche course, it'll be covered more in depth. And then a terrain trap was one of those. This is very important. If you go from a steeper slope to a flat or concave area, you're going to have a foot deep avalanche turn into 4 feet of burial. That guy that I told you about that was buried, I believe the avalanche was about 45 centimeters, so about 1.5 feet. And again, his burial was over 2 meters. Very, very similar to this image where something steep into a gully. Didn't even travel that far. It's quite a deep burial. And then there's powder turns outside of avalanche terrain. When you're first getting started, you can, with digital mapping and doing some research online and talking with or going out with a guide, you can find areas that are below 30 degrees and still have an awesome time. So there's no reason to push it when you start getting into that avalanche terrain. Like this shot right here, this person, they're below 30 degrees. And this is a beautiful base shot in Utah, just in the white room. Yeah. And then human factors, probably the most important part of traveling in avalanche terrain. Take that back. It is the most important factor. We make our decisions, we control our decisions, and our decisions are typically what lead us to bad outcomes or good outcomes. So personal disaster flags are things that exist in our personalities that, no one's perfect. We're not asking you to change these things about yourself, but I think recognizing these things is super important. Recognizing it in yourself, communicating that with your partner, recognizing it in your partners and communicating with them. For example, just a quick story, my oldest touring partner, and we're still touring partners. We've started out together, made some silly mistakes, and we were in Colorado one time and had just gotten to a lodge and we're put our gear down. We're ready to go out. We had just a few hours of light. We saw a great couloir, wanted to get to it. We were being hasty and we had tunnel vision. And we get to a point where we split, either go a long way around or we go a steeper way up toward our goal. And I wanted to go the long way. He wanted to go the short way. I gave in to peer pressure. We went the short way. I still didn't feel good about it. I stayed on an island of safety and watched him cross what looked like a wind slab. Sure enough, it was. Broke pretty deep, but it didn't move too far and he wasn't buried. But he could have hurt himself with some trauma, breaking the leg or twisting a knee and ruining the trip, or it could have been worse. It could have been a worse avalanche path. The point was we ignored these things about ourselves that we should have been paying attention to, and sure enough, we triggered an avalanche. Could have been a much worse outcome, but it happens. So don't be hasty. Just know these things about yourself that might lead to some poor decisions in the backcountry. And then FACETS is an acronym we use a lot, especially in avalanche education. And FACETS are obviously part of the snowpack and snow science, but we just use the acronym for talking about human factors. We talk about these heuristics, these things that we do every day that we don't think about and how they can trap us sometimes. So just going through those real quick. We have familiarity, acceptance. So being super familiar with an area and thinking we know everything happens quite often, especially in areas like the Wasatch where things are very accessible and you're close to everything. Acceptance is you're in a group, you don't want to speak up, you don't want to say anything because You just want to be part of the group, so you don't. And sometimes not saying the things that you see leads to an accident. Commitment. A lot of us are goal-oriented driven. And when we say we want to do something, we'll ignore red flags and signs saying we shouldn't do something and still do it. Again, leads to an accident. Expert halo, you go out with your buddies, been doing it 10 years, and you don't question anything they do because you think they have more experience than you, and maybe they do, but we develop bad habits over time, and not questioning that person, even with a guide, can become an issue. I always tell my clients when I'm out with them, like, they need to speak up if they see something or if they're not comfortable with something. We're a team when we're out there. It's not just the guide that's making the decisions. Tracks. Scarcity mindset, big one in crowded areas like the Wasatch. It's just like at a resort. Everyone wants first tracks, so they have tunnel vision and put on the blinders, and all they see is getting to a zone where no one else has been, and they want to be there first, and they're racing there. And again, they're ignoring the red flags when they're not stopping to assess the snowpack, not stopping to talk with their team about the decisions they're making. And social proof, just because it's been skied doesn't mean it's safe. This is in particular very true with persistent weak layers, which we get very often in the Intermountain and continental snowpacks, which would be Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, places like that. So just because it's been skied doesn't mean one avalanche. I can't iterate that enough. It's most persistent weak layer avalanches happen when there's been quite a bit of activity on that slab and on that weak layer. You just have to hit the right thin spot that triggers the entire slope and creates that domino effect of an avalanche. So just because you see it doesn't mean, and it's been done, don't do it. You make your own decision. I like to see things with a blank canvas just to hold myself in check. Those tracks just mean nothing to me. Yeah. And then where to go from here? More workshops like this. I'm glad you're here today. This is a great step. It's where it starts. A lot of the local avalanche centers offer free Know Before You Go courses. A lot of it's online. There's some great online learning material that you can go to. Mentorship is the best thing to do. If you can find professional mentorship, that's for you, or a really truly vetted, experienced amateur recreationalist. Avalanche education here in the US, we have the level 1 and rescue fundamentals courses, which are the two that I recommend the least. The rescue fundamentals is a day of just practicing rescue. I recommend that to novices and intermediates and even experts once a year. And level 1 is great after you get out for a few days and learn how to use your equipment and get some experience. And then learn how to use those digital mapping tools. Once again, there's just a plethora of resources for you online for that. And then mileage. Just get out there, start mellow. Just learn how to transition to skiing, back to skinning, etc. Learn how to use your equipment, fumble around with it, fumble with your backpack, learn how to repack your backpack and do it again and again and again. Like, the beautiful thing about backcountry skiing and ski mountaineering in general, or any mountaineering, is for those that love constantly making things more efficient, then it's the sport for you. If you always want to hone your skills and do something a little bit better and always constantly improve, this is a sport for you. That's I jive with that, and I always think of something that I can make a little bit lighter or make a little more durable or a little extra thing I need or don't need, and like always thinking about how to pack more efficiently, how to travel more efficiently, how to wear clothing more efficiently. And then your self check-ins are super important. Debrief with yourself, but also with your group. Like I said, communicate before, during, and after. Were we good or were we lucky? Like, did we ski a slope that will avalanche the next time someone's on it or the next time after that, and we were lucky, but we thought we were good? What went well? What to improve? Debriefing super important. Don't wait till the next day to do it, because it's not going to happen. Either do it at the car or do it in the car, or if you guys go out for drinks and to hang out after, do it then. But don't let things go unspoken that didn't go right or that you should have done differently. You want to building a partnership is truly, it's an intimate relationship. You're taking risks together, you're putting you're vulnerable together, and you're relying on each other literally to save each other's lives. So you need to form a good cohesive relationship with a guide or with your partners out there. And you want people with similar skills, fitness goals. Risk tolerance is a key one. And those are flexible with the guide, but with partners, you want to align those things, especially the risk tolerance factor. You don't want to be arguing over, oh, I'm not doing that, that's scary, and then that they do it and they're alone and you're alone. And yeah, know each other's risk tolerance before you go. All right. And some resources. I did forget to cite the American Avalanche Institute, who is our partner with Avalanche Curriculum and Education. For books, Staying Alive in Avalanche Terrain by Bruce Tremper, the Utah, it's really good. And then The Avalanche Factor by Joe Stock out of Alaska is really good. And then why a guide? I think I've covered that, but just a bullet point list. Back in Alaska right here in this image, but risk management is the key one. So there's a lot of factors and different types of risk management that go into the tour plan. And while we're out there as well, local knowledge is huge. Efficient route planning. We get examined a lot on our track setting and how we lead routes. So there's a lot of scrutiny on us for that. So it's something that when we're being mentored and out training as well, we're assessing and talking about. So efficient route planning and route finding and then touring is super critical and can conserve a lot of energy. We like to say it can turn a 2,000 vertical day into a 5,000 to 6,000 vertical day. So can definitely increase the vertical that you're skiing and climbing in a day. Skill development, just the mentorship, access to gear, access to certain things you may not want to purchase until you know that you're really into it. And then, the logistics side, permits, insurance, trip planning, if you're doing a larger guided trip, something like that. And then giving backcountry touring a test run. It's good to do it with the guide, see if it's for you before you fully commit, because there's good rentals and things like that for touring nowadays. Before you start touring, the why is important. As you're touring, it's important to remember the why. I think there is a necessity for humans to tap into our instincts in survival and being in risky situations, with safety nets, but getting out there and tapping into essentially the primal species that we are, tapping into nature and connecting with it and being present in the moment, being out with friends and having a good time. There's just so many good reasons for the why, but don't lose that why as you're getting into backcountry travel and ski touring, and don't lose it in competition unless you're a competitor or something like that. But my point is just remember the why, slow down and breathe and remember why you're out there, and don't lose sight of your decisions and the safety, and just returning home at the end of the day, I think is the most important thing. We don't want to make decisions that stop that from happening. This is me in my home. My house is literally just right over the ridge right here, and just getting out and breathing and seeing how beautiful my home is a huge reason in my life. Yeah, we got a lot of trips here in Utah and other places too. We do guide internationally. We have one of the most experienced teams in, I'd say, for sure in Utah. We have 5 full-time guides and 3 of them are FMGA guides. And in the US, that's quite a high ratio. Winslow is a ski mountaineering guide, and I have 1 exam left to be fully certified in that, but still am allowed to operate under certain procedures. And yeah, we have quite an experienced team that's gone through certifications and testing, and as well as decades of experience. And we all have our professional level 2 certification for avalanches. We all have our wilderness first responder. And like I said, all our guys are really experienced. Todd has done a lot of first ascents, Antarctica, also done the 7 summits and guided them. And he's done a number of pretty crazy lines and peaks, especially in Alaska. Willie Benegas is internationally known for climbing, but is an amazing skier as well. He's done 13 summits of the Everest, which is in the top 20, I think, still, including Sherpas. I think he's doing his last one this year. Winslow has also done first ascents in Antarctica. I just like to ski. I love skiing. And then Joseph Pavio, also on our crew, not in this picture, and Willie, who's in the picture, have both been on the Golden Piton significant ascents list at different years. So really experienced team here. Hope to see you guys out there. Love the sport, so the more people, the better in it. Bye, everyone.